Hello, good morning. My name is Chiara Benetti, and on behalf of ETA Florence Renewable Energies, we're packet leader for communication and dissemination for NEGEM project and technical organizer of this workshop together with VTT. I welcome you to the first vision workshop of NEGEM project about negative emissions technologies and practices, building a vision towards climate neutrality. Thank you all for your great participation today. And I leave the floor to Kati Kuponen, Senior Scientist at the VTT, for the first introduction and presentation of the workshop. So enjoy the workshop and thank you.
Thank you, Chiara, and hello everyone from my behalf, and welcome to the first vision workshop of the NEGEM project. My name is Kati Koponen, and I come from VTT Technical Research Center of Finland, and I will begin as a coordinator of this project from the beginning of the next year. And today I'll be hosting this webinar. So before we start, let's go through some practicalities for today's meeting. So please be muted and switch off your videos if not presenting. Please post your questions to the question and answers box during the presentations, and we will pick them up from there for the discussion. You can also indicate the presenter to whom you wish to address your question. Please use the chat box if you have technical problems or some other business. The presentations will be shared on the project website, and we will also be recording this event. Okay, so here you can see the agenda for today's workshop. So first I will give a very short introduction to the NEGEM project and the goal of this workshop. Then we will have the opening words from NEGEM Advisory Board, followed by 3 presentations from NEGEM researchers. And after each presentation, we will have time for a few questions, which I will pick up from the question and answers box as indicated. And at the end, we will have time for more discussion. We will also have polls in between of the presentations for you to answer. So let's try to have as interactive workshop as possible in this current setup. Okay, so then a short introduction to the NEGEM project. So NEGEM project is a EU Horizon 2020 funded research project running for 4 years, and it has started last June. The main objective of NEGEM is to analyze the realistic potential of negative emission technologies and practices, so-called NETPs. This realistic potential is not yet so well understood. As we know from many climate change mitigation scenarios, we see that there is a significant demand for the NETPs. But to understand their realistic potential, also the technical, environmental, social, political, and acceptability constraints should be understood. So NEGEM project will address this issue and analyze to what extent the NETPs are required to achieve climate neutrality and how the constraints mentioned may limit their contribution. Our aim is a comprehensive analysis of the realistic and sustainably deployable potential of the NETPs. So one part of NEGEM work is to formulate a NEGEM vision on the role of the NETPs. And today's workshop, together with the questionnaire that was sent before workshop, is the starting point for this vision work. So we want to integrate stakeholder and research community views for the construction of this vision. And this is why it's great to see you all here today together with us. Okay, so today when we talk about vision, we mean a medium and long-term vision in European and global context for the NETPs. Great, so let's move on to the presentations. And our first speaker is Timo Ritonummi, who is the representative of NEGEM External Advisory Board. Timo is the Deputy Director General from the Energy Department of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment of Finland, and he will give us the opening words. So please, Timo, floor is yours.
Thank you, Kati, and good morning also from my side. Oh, actually, in Finland, it's only 1 hour till noon, and it's quite gray here in southern Finland. But anyway, so yes, I was introduced. So when I was thinking that I would show 1 or 2 slides or pictures, then I thought that I don't do it because I know that several times you will see the same picture. The greenhouse gas emissions, the history, how it goes up, and then also the future, how we should see it, how it will go down and down quickly. I don't know. Okay, maybe you see me. Okay, but anyway, my picture was freezing here in the camera. But anyway, so in future, in EU has now the goal to be carbon neutral by 2050, and for 2030, the goal is to reduce at least 55% from 2005. And whether this 2030 goal is minus 55 or whether it's 60, or if you in 2030, if you include sinks, whether it's not all the 55 but maybe 51 or 52. Anyway, it's only 10 years time, and after 2030 for EU it will be 20 years to receive to get the carbon neutral issue. And also, for instance, in Finland, our politicians decided that 2035, so in 15 years, we should be Finland should be carbon neutral. So there's hurry, and for the time right now, the COVID-19 is of course helping, but it's, even if you look at the IEA's statistics, it doesn't. The COVID, how strategic is, it doesn't reduce the emissions even enough. So for the future in EU and in globally, we have to do a lot, and with several measures. So right now, of course, you can do a lot of energy efficiency, or with the technology that's available now, we can reduce the next year, in 2 years or even 5 years, you can reduce the emissions. But for the longer run, for the 2030 goal, or in Finland 2035 or 2050, or even in China the 2060 goal to be carbon neutral, you need new measures that will give a lot of negative emissions reductions. So your work is for the future, for not only for Europe, for the global issue. So more or less, and I have to say that a lot of things. So what you are doing, and for instance, what hydrogen is now very hot issue in, or hydrogen and fuel cells are very hot in EU. Those things. So hydrogen has been known for a long time. It has been used in Hindenburg was flying with hydrogen, and then fuel cells have been used in space history, in Apollo program. So technologies and solvers are there. You have to just reduce the cost and pump up the volume to put those technologies available. So that's more or less that I have to say, and have a good workshop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Timo. Are there any questions at this point to Timo?
Turn off the camera. Yeah, well, I thought it already when I started to speak.
Yes, we can see you now.
Okay.
I think there are no questions at this point, so we can save the discussion for later.
Okay, yeah, well, I will follow it.
Yes, thank you, Timo.
Okay.
And so our next speaker should be David Reiner. Is David online? I think he's not there yet. So we take first then Selene Kobo. Or actually, first we have to, we will launch our first poll first for you to answer. So our first question is, what policy instruments would you see the most efficient in supporting the development of NETPs in desired direction from the European perspective? And please respond to this question during the next presentation, and we will see the results right after that. Okay, so we take Selene's presentation now. So our next speaker is Selene Kobo, who is a postdoctoral researcher in ETH Zurich and working at the NEGEM project on sustainability assessment of negative emission technologies and practices. So please, Selene, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I work at ETH with Gonzalo, who's the leader of Work Package 1 within the NEGEM project. And today I will be describing the progress that we've made so far on the selection and the sustainability assessment of negative emission technologies and practices. So the objective of ETH within the Work Package 1 is to assess the sustainability performance of negative emission technologies and practices. Our first task was to review the current and emerging nets that are described in the literature and to select those that will be studied in the course of the project. We also identified a set of sustainability key performance indicators that we will use to assess these nets. And right now, and in the next phases of the project, our job will be to assess the performance of these nets across all sustainability dimensions. So first, we should answer the question, what are negative emission systems? And well, negative emission systems should meet two requisites. The first one is that their life cycle greenhouse gas emissions should not exceed the amount of greenhouse gases that are withdrawn from the atmosphere and subsequently stored. And the second one is that these greenhouse gases must be sequestered in a manner intended to be permanent. And this essentially means that they must be sequestered in the sink that is not subject to foreseeable perturbations. So in this slide, we have an overview of all the potential nets that we have identified in the literature and the relationships between them. I say potential because it hasn't been demonstrated yet that the greenhouse gas balances for all of them are negative. And well, we can make a distinction between two types of nets, those that rely on the enhancement of natural carbon sinks, which are the terrestrial and the marine sinks, and those that deploy CO2 capture technologies to capture the CO2 and subsequently store it in the deep ocean or in geological reservoirs as high pressure CO2 or as mineral carbonates. Well, within the terrestrial nets, we have afforestation, reforestation. Those are the best known ones. We also have soil carbon sequestration, biochar amendment. Within the marine nets category, we have ocean fertilization, ocean alkalinization, coastal blue carbon. Those are the most studied ones. Within the BECCS processes, we can make a distinction between thermochemical processes like combustion, gasification, pyrolysis, and also biological processes that include fermentation and anaerobic digestion. And then we also have chemical processes, which include direct air capture, but also other less studied processes like the degradation of non-CO2 greenhouse gases. Well, we don't have the time to go over all of these nets, but we can say in general that terrestrial nets are easy to implement practices, and there are currently several NGOs and projects like the Trillion Tree campaign that are seeking to expand the deployment of these practices. And about marine nets, we can say in general that they have low TRLs and that there are few experimental results yet. Few experiments have been carried out, so more basic research is needed to fully assess these technologies and consider them a feasible strategy to remove CO2. BECCS processes have a higher level of maturity. In 2019, a total of 1.5 million tons of CO2 were sequestered via BECCS processes. 2/3 of it were captured in a bioethanol production plant. And although there are some projects under development, it is true that there's still a lot of work to be done in this area to meet to reach the gigaton scale that we need to meet the 1.5 degree target with these processes. Then regarding direct air capture, there are currently a total of 9 DAC plants that are reported to be operating worldwide with a total CO2 removal capacity of 5.5 kilotons of CO2 per year. Although some new plants are currently under construction, the largest one of which is a 0.5 million ton per year plant. And well, the costs of this technology are still high, but they are expected, the costs are expected to drop following technology learning curves similar to those of photovoltaics or batteries. Moving on to the selection of nets that we will study within the project. We identified 3 key performance indicators, namely the technology readiness level, the maximum carbon dioxide removal capacity, and the costs of the nets. And we also defined some kind of criteria to identify 3 intervals. So we defined low, intermediate, and high potential intervals for these KPIs. So depending on the interval to which they depend, we assigned a different value to these KPIs, and we calculated a single score, which allowed us to rank the technologies and practices of each category from lower to higher deployment potential. So here in this table, we have a list of all the nets that we studied. And in the green cells, we have the technologies that have a high potential according to our score. The yellow cells indicate an intermediate deployment potential, and the red cells indicate a low deployment potential. But of course, we cannot just select the nets that we will study based on just these 3 KPIs. We need also to take into account the potential unintended impacts of nets. Based on our literature review, we compiled them in this table. And we can see that BECCS and terrestrial nets share some of the same potential side effects. For instance, land use change, albedo change, possible adverse biodiversity impacts, and also perhaps the emission of greenhouse gases associated with this land use change. BECCS processes can also have a high water demand, and they can release pollutants because of the application of fertilizers. Another potential impact of terrestrial nets is that they can release the stored carbon in the case of unexpected events like fires, droughts, or pests. Well, about marine nets, we can say that yes, they have some of these impacts like negative biodiversity impacts and ocean acidification, but the truth is that because of their low TRLs, these side effects are still quite uncertain. And based on this table, we could say that perhaps the most promising chemical net could be direct air capture, because it has fewer side effects, although it does have a high energy demand. Okay, so based on the ranking that we did, and also on the side effects that we just commented, we selected the nets that we will study in the next phases of the NEGEM project. And these are in the terrestrial nets category. We have biochar amendments, afforestation, reforestation, and soil carbon sequestration. In the marine nets category, we have also ocean alkalinization and coastal blue carbon, combustion, pyrolysis, gasification, and ethanol fermentation BECCS. And in the chemical category, we'll have different types of direct air capture and mineral carbonation. So how are we planning to assess the sustainability of all these nets? Well, we identified a set of key performance indicators, which are on the one hand technical KPIs, which include CO2 removal efficiency, avoided emissions, energy consumption, but also some of the KPIs that we just went over, like the sequestration potential, the storage lifetime, and the TRL, which are data that are provided in the literature. Then as environmental KPIs, we will use the indicators that are there, that will be the result of the life cycle assessment that we will perform for each of the individual technologies. And as economic KPIs, we will use the levelized cost of CO2 and also the externalities of the nets. And we will use human health impacts as social indicators. So based on the literature review that we performed, we can conclude that the deployment potential of nets is currently constrained by their technical maturity, their economic feasibility, their resource use, their sequestration capacity, but also by their local and regional environmental impacts. And that's why, in order to meet the carbon dioxide removal targets, which by mid-century will be up to 10 gigatons of CO2 per year, we will need to invest in a portfolio of nets. And that's why it is so important to perform a thorough sustainability assessment in order to inform policymakers and help them plan for the sustainable deployment of these technologies and practices. And that's everything that I wanted to tell you today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Selene, for your presentation. And I think we have at least one question already. So there has been a question on the question is why all the anaerobic digestion experience and extremely low cost was not considered in this study. So can you comment on that?
Yes, let me share my screen again. If we go to anaerobic digestion, we say that they have it has an intermediate potential as the other BECCS. It has a high TRL, and the problem with this net would be its high costs compared to other ones that we have selected. And also because it relies mostly on wastes. its carbon dioxide removal is its potential is lower than the other BECCS nets that we selected. I mean, in the end, the truth is that within the scope of this project, we cannot study all of them because we are only 2 people working on this. But yes, I agree that this is an interesting technology, and it has a high TRL because anaerobic digestion is already implemented quite a lot. But the combination of anaerobic digestion plus CCS, not really. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And I think that also someone promised to further answer the question in the chat. And there's another question. So does the cost include only capture or also the transport and storage?
The costs should include all the costs across the life cycle of the technology. So yes, of course, it should include transport and storage as well.
Yes. And I think we can take even one more question. So what is the time span for storage that you consider?
Well, that is a tricky question.
Yes.
I mean, in theory, it should be permanent. The question is how you define permanent. I don't have an answer for that. I don't think anyone does.
Yes, yes. And I think this will be further discussed during the project.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Selene, and thank you for all the questions. And Selene, maybe you can even see them on the chat and see if you can answer by typing more of the questions. Okay, so now we get the results of our first poll. So it seems that there is no one clear favorite, but the most efficient instrument supporting the development of the NETPs could be the financial instruments such as taxes and subsidies. So thank you for your answers for the poll, and we will save these for later to support our vision work. Okay, so yeah, and now we launched our next poll. And the next question is, what would you consider as the primary barrier for the breakthrough of NETPs? And please answer this during the next presentation. And unfortunately, it seems that we haven't heard of David. Hopefully there's nothing serious happened to him. So we will go straight to Tiina's presentation. So our next speaker then is Tiina Koljonen from VTT Technical Research Center of Finland. Tiina is a research team leader here, and she will tell us more about the work on NEGEM vision. And she will be also chairing the final discussion, but let's see if we get David before that online. But please, Tiina, now the floor is yours.
So thank you, Kati, and good morning, everybody who is there online. I'm not sure who are there, but maybe also good afternoon or maybe good evening as well. We were able to see that there are also people interested around the world, which was very, very nice to hear. Just about the practicalities, I can see that there are a lot of questions coming still for the first presentation. We have plenty of time in the end, so I hope that we will have the lively discussion after my presentation, and hopefully we will still get David on board, but let's see. So I will give some short introduction to the NEGEM vision. So we have been doing a literature survey related to the demands of NETPs. We now have preliminary results. The work is still going on. Secondly, we also launched a pre-questionnaire for those who were invited to the workshop. So I will also quickly go through the questionnaire results we received until yesterday morning. So first, about some results about the literature review of the role in different scenario and impact assessment of to reach the Paris Agreement goals. So we have been going through both the so-called grey literature, which include, as an example, those impact assessment and other reports by the European Commission, also the Joint Research Center from the Commission, International Energy Agency, IRENA, ASAC, Shell, BP, and so on. So we have been going through a rather lot of those which are not so-called peer review articles, but until now we have been looking at, for the peer review analysis, the YASA database, which includes a huge amount of data available to look at also NETPs and how they look like. Based on the literature, we were really able to see that the most common NETP by 2050 is definitely bioenergy related carbon capture and storage, so-called BCCS. The second most measured is direct air capture and storage. But when we move from BECCS to DAC, we can see that DAC is still lacking in many scenario assessments. But when you are looking at the most recent ones, we can see that DAC is really entering also different analyses. There are also analyses which include afforestation and also some which include soil carbon. There we haven't seen any so far, or there are only a few which are looking for oceans. So that is, we can conclude that most of the NETPs shown in the scenarios are related to biomass or soil or direct air capture. On the other hand, when we are going through the scenarios, it is sometimes very difficult to separate the land use change and forestry sector, and on the other hand, also the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector development from additional negative emission practices. So there are also a little bit like overlapping these, that NETPs are included in the other negative emission or including LULUCF or AFULU, and it's very difficult to really look and analyze what are the additional negative emission practices. On the other hand, in some studies, also the carbon capture and utilization has been considered as a negative emissions. On the other hand, without further specification on the lifetime of the CCU products. So we can still see that it's very difficult to compare different scenarios. It's not very clear how NETPs have been calculated, the impacts and so on. But we will give some highlights and more in-depth analysis in our report, which is coming in the end of January. So this is just an example of two different types of analyses. On the left-hand side, we have checked the YASA database of peer review articles and calculated the global mean estimates related with different NETPs. You can see there in the legend that there are BECCS is shown there, direct air capture is shown there, afforestation, weathering, and soil are shown there. So I forgot to mention that also weathering is mentioned in some of the scenario assessments. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you can see the analysis published by EU last fall. That is the impact assessments, which is related to the increased greenhouse gas mitigation target by 2030. We can conclude that if we compare the peer review articles with impact assessments with the CRE literature, more or less the amount of NETPs in this CRE literature is more or less comparable with BECS only in peer review articles. So as an example, by 2050 to 70, about average 0.3 to 3 gigaton captured CO2 in CRE literature, which is rather similar with the BECS there in peer review articles on the left-hand side. On the other hand, the CRE literature, the definition of climate targets is not very clear in those assessments. They are talking about net zero carbon or something else. So these are also not very comparable with when we are looking at the peer review articles, which are really looking at the 1.5 mitigation scenarios. And then on the other hand, the CRE literature, which are more like storylines for different climate targets. So this is an example of BECS to reach the mitigation target of Paris Agreement in peer review articles. So this is now taken from the DIASA database. On the left-hand side, there is the variation shown from OECD countries. And then on the left-hand side, there is this global mean by 2050. So variation of BECS in different scenarios, and you can compare that to the global mean with 3.3 gigaton CO2. So you can really see that there is rather high uncertainty when we are looking at different scenarios and scenario assessments. Then if we look at Europe, those assessments we have been going through so far, we can see that the amount of NETPs is typically between 50 to 300 megatons CO2 in the period of between 2050 to 2070. On the right-hand side, you can see the impact assessments of a commission launched last fall about tightening the mitigation target of EU by 2030. So this is very common picture, and probably I guess that most of us have seen this picture. You can see the amount of NETPs, which is there in the bottom, the negative side, the red line. So you can see that it's not the amount of NETPs is expected in these analyses rather small. I also have one picture of our own national impact assessments to reach climate neutrality by 2035 in Finland. So like Timo Ritoniemi mentioned in the first presentation, we are really now targeting climate neutrality by 2035. You can see that we have two alternative scenarios there. We call them growth and save scenarios. In growth, we were expecting that NETPs are not implemented at all in Finland because we don't have any storage sites. On the other hand, in the safe scenario, we have allowed our model to invest to NETPs. And even in like a small country like Finland, we were able to see that our potential by 2050 could be even above 10 megatons CO2 captured by 2050. So this is just to give us some highlights that about the story that we really need to go also to look at the country level analyses. We have already started that in our literature review, but we will also report some country level assessments about the potentials. And then we can come back to the question then, what is really the realistic potential by 2050? I guess that it could be somewhere in between the growth and safe scenario, but we will come back in the later stages of the NEGEM project, so that what is really how we see the realistic potentials. So then I will move to the results of the questionnaire. We were seeing that there were several, about 200 people had been clicking the questionnaire. We received 27 answers by yesterday morning. So these slides are about yesterday morning answers. So they have been some more. So today we had 32 answers. Of course, we were like looking for a little bit more, but I think it's still pretty well compared to that the situation that what is the average percentage for answering these polls when you're looking or different questionnaires entering to your table. So the questionnaire was distributed through the target workshop parallels participants in parallel with the invitation. And then about 63% of the answers came from Europe. So they were also a little bit less than 40% answers outside Europe. So that was also nice surprise for us that also the people around the globe were interested in. And you can see also the distribution of stakeholder groups, which were like answering and distributed the questionnaire. And there was just one question related to the awareness of different NETPs. You can see that bioenergy with CO2 capture and storage, those who were answering the questionnaire, they were pretty well aware about NETPs. On the other hand, if you are looking at the results related to the ocean organization, fertilization, or enhanced weathering, you can see that the awareness of NETPs related to ocean was not so good at all. So this also tells something that maybe what needs to be looked after in the future. Luckily, there is another Horizon project running at the same time, which is only looking at the ocean-related NETPs. So there is a good possibility now also to get the awareness of different ocean-related NETPs. This shows also the results about the prospects of NETPs. So if we were having the questions both related to the global context and European context. If you are comparing these two, now this is about long-term prospects, you can see that the results are pretty much similar. So those who were answering to the poll, it was like they were expecting about the same amount of NETPs of related different technologies, both in the global and European context. On the other hand, if we were also asking about the medium-term prospects, and those results also looked very similar with the long-term context. So this was now my first part of the presentation, and I will now give floor to Kati. I guess I'm not sure if there are some questions, but maybe now it's still, we have good room to respond the questions. So please, Kati.
Okay, thank you, Tina, for this interesting presentation. I think I don't see any question yet. On your presentation.
Okay,
but we will continue with that on the discussion section, and now we will see the results of our poll question that we launched before your presentation. So it seems that the primary barrier for the NETPs was considered to be the economic performance and also the lack of common European policy framework to support their development. Yes, so this is good to know. And then we'll launch our next question, next poll question. So that is, what would you consider the primary goal for the NEGEM vision to serve? So please answer that question during our next presentation, because now we have David online, which is great.
Oh, welcome, David.
Yes, so now we'll take David's presentation before the discussion still. And just let me introduce you. So our next speaker is David Reiner, who is Assistant Director of Energy Policy Research Group in University of Cambridge. And he's working with us in the NEGEM project. And today he will tell us about carbon dioxide removal and the European climate law. And it's great to have you here now, David. So please, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Kati. I'm probably feeling a bit more flustered than usual because I spent a long while trying to get my internet working again. So if you can see my screen, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say a few words about maybe our first common purpose that we've had within our consortium, and that was an effort to try and will hopefully be coming out as a short correspondence in Nature at the very beginning of the new year. So that's already one one small accomplishment in terms of bringing people together, kind of to think about how we might kind of conceptualize our sort of consortium's approach to thinking about CDR. And the obvious place to start has been the sort of the current debate over the European climate law. So I kind of list my co-authors here. They designated me as the point person. I'm very happy to do that, and I think it's as I said, been a useful exercise, I think, for all of us to really engage in this process of thinking through where it is there's kind of common agreement about thinking about how CDR might be included going forward, what the role is going forward. So this, for many of you, will be obvious, but clearly the European Green Deal sits at the heart of the Commission's the new Commission's agenda, and climate neutrality is at the heart of the European Green Deal. The nature of the post-COVID recovery has also placed, I think, even more attention to this notion that we're seeing well around the world, really, in terms of thinking about using the kind of the recovery as an opportunity to be investing and engaging in addressing climate change. And in terms of the European Green Deal, the climate law, which is currently the subject of a debate, is central to that. I say before the end of 2020, they need to make these decisions. That's partly in the context of needing to submit the new updated nationally determined contribution, which will be the kind of future EU 2030 target and beyond. And the debate, interestingly, has hinged both on the level of ambition, which is what we might expect, but also the extent to which we should be including carbon dioxide removal in that single target, and maybe to a lesser extent whether there should be separate targets. Really, most of the kind of headline debate that we've seen in the press amongst politicians, European parliamentarians, has kind of hinged around the overall notion of that target. And as a general rule, the idea that CDR is viewed by some as a source of greater flexibility in allowing the EU to meet its targets, and by others as a kind of a watering down of ambition. And I think you can argue that both of those things can be true. But I think our focus, as I said, as we came together as a group, was that, rather than thinking about the short term, the goal really should be kind of kept further on the 2050 targets. And so what we should be thinking about using the next decade to do is to build up the evidence base for sustainable CDR. So CDR that would meet kind of high environmental and wider standards, so that going forward post 2030 into our longer term effort at carbon neutrality by 2050, that we want to be able to be more assured as to the delivery of verifiable negative emissions at scale, going beyond 2030. So where is the debate at? I think there has been for the last couple of years pretty widespread consensus that the kind of previous target of 40% needs to be strengthened. So I think that's not really an area where there has been much debate. The Commission sort of came in the spring and suggested that we should have a target of 55%, including CDR. After much debate and relatively close vote in Parliament, the European Parliament agreed to support a 60% target, so strengthening of the headline target, but also explicitly leaving out a CDR, and then those following the late night debate, I guess it was last Thursday, the European Council agreed on a 55% target, but with CDR. And again, we still haven't really resolved this debate, I think, unless I missed something in the last day or so of the news. But that is something that will need to be resolved as part of the trilogue process involving the Parliament, Council, and the Commission. And so, you know, I think that the question, or our concern almost, is that the emphasis on CDR has tended to focus on this as a, you know, in a very utilitarian way, very, if you want, politicized way, and you know, rather, you know, the goal should be the emphasis on thinking about this longer term. So whether, you know, if it were to be, for example, excluded, that doesn't mean that we will still be ready post 2030 to deliver, you know, potential negative emissions at scale. It might just, you know, receive maybe less attention. And the danger, again, if it is included, is that it might be, again, viewed in a very utilitarian way. So again, our goal, or our, if you want, agreement within our consortium is the need to kind of catalyze this debate over the next few years, really. So if you look at actually what has materialized as part of this debate over the European climate law, I think one very positive thing that we've seen is that the Parliament agreed on an amendment that would create essentially some sort of, you know, independent EU climate change council that would serve kind of very similar purposes to the UK Committee on Climate Change. Similarly, in France and Germany, they've been talking about similar things. And you know, that level of independent scrutiny is exactly the sort of thing that we would like to see, particularly kind of with a lens focused on CDR that could allow for a clearer, a more objective basis for assessing what you know, what the potential contribution of CDR might be. So, you know, just over this past week, as again, the equivalent, the UK's Committee on Climate Change has released its 6th carbon budget analysis, and that has gotten really down into very detailed assessments of, you know, potential for you know, waste, you know, kind of waste for energy with CCS. What is the potential for this kind of very narrow thing? And thinking about, you know, again, what are some of the practical, economic, and sustainability considerations associated with, you know, every little aspect of meeting something like a 6th carbon budget in the UK context, and seeing something like that at the EU level, I think would give us enormous comfort as to the a consensus and independent view of how CDR might contribute a longer term. You know, I think that there's a concern that including CDR, you know, in a single target might end up emphasizing those least cost reductions, those that are furthest along, and perhaps neglect other potentially quite promising options, or at least ones that deserve to be investigated over the coming decade. So, as I said, I think there amongst our consortium was kind of an agreement that we can be using the next decade to great advantage, thinking about technology readiness, thinking about accounting methodologies, thinking about how to get the incentive structures right and develop the appropriate business models, as well as thinking about what the relative kind of national endowments are for these CDR opportunities. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for your presentations. Are there any questions directed to David? Maybe not yet, so maybe we'll take them during the discussion then. And now we are already seeing the results to our last poll question. So what would be the primary goal for NEGEM vision? And again, it's quite even. So most of you think that it should support the European policy making and also ensure the environmental sustainability of the NETPs. And someone was asking how many people we are in the webinar. So we are around 80 people answering these polls. So that's quite a good take. Then the last poll question is, how would you see the role of NETPs in comparison with emission reductions? So this is directly related to David's presentation. So we'll take that question still, and you can answer it. Maybe during that, Tina will guide us to the discussion section next. So you have some time to respond to this last poll question as well. So I think I will give the floor to Tina now. And we have now plenty of time for discussion, and maybe we can even then stop a bit earlier if we seem to be ready earlier. But please, Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kati. I would like that you first respond to the poll. So we will take pretty soon the results of the last poll. And then I will also have some extra questions to be answered, but before that, we can also take some issues or questions or comments also from the question and answers. And if you want to also have indicate some discussion by talking, I guess that is also possible, but please indicate to the question and answer if you want to have a question with your own voice. But are we able to have a look at the poll already, or should we wait? Okay, great. So this is now a very clear, or rather clear, answer. So compared to the others, there were few responses which were pretty close, but now the question related, how would you see the role of NETPs in comparison with emission reductions? So it is rather clear that those who have been responded that want to have the fastest impact, maximal introduction of NETPs in parallel with emission reductions. So that was rather clear. 28% were also looking at NETPs are only secondary measure if emission reduction prove insufficient. So thank you for answering to the poll. But in the first place, this whole vision workshop was supposed to be face-to-face workshop and so-called like to have interactive discussions between each other. But of course, because the corona situation changed the whole plan, now we decided to move on to have more participants, and then more like giving also the presentations from NEGEM related to those analyses we have been able to assess so far. NEGEM is just having we are ending our first half of the year, so we are just in the beginning of the work as a whole. But I would like to still ask some your ideas or your opinions, and also to write to the chat, or sorry, to questions as answers, some extra words, because in the earlier workshops we have already ended up to the conclusions that NETPs are seen as complementary measures to greenhouse gas emission reduction. But then, because we need to define the vision for NEGEM as a whole, I would like to see if you could also write some words about extra word, how you would define its role, both in the medium and long term could be considered. It could be like adjectives or some suspicious or so. So please go ahead, write some extra words there to the question and answers, so we can then have a look at what people are thinking about. But there have been also a lot of questions and comments related to biogas as an example. And the other hand, there has been also these questions related to biochar. Still, when you are thinking about question 1, what to write there, maybe Salen, could you give your own opinions about biogas and biochar, how that showed in your assessments and your analyses you have been working with?
Yes, I already explained why we excluded anaerobic digestion from our analysis.
No, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. Yeah, I already explained why I excluded anaerobic digestion from my analysis. Yes, the reason is that only some type of wastes are subject to, can be subjected to anaerobic digestion, but yes, still I think that it is worth looking into it, despite it has a lower CDR potential than other nets in the bioenergy sector. And regarding biochar, we are going to assess it in the next phases of the project. It doesn't have a very high CDR potential, but the costs are not too high, and yeah, we think it's worth further exploring to that.
And then about the soil carbon.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the question about the soil carbon sequestration?
Yeah, there are the comments also, the soil carbon and its role. Can you also highlight a little bit that how you have been looking at the soil carbon and its role and in the NETPs?
Yes, how are we planning to assess it? Well, the researchers from INSA are going to take care of that part. They are studying how the use of perennial crops will improve carbon sequestration. And yes, the truth is that I am not an expert on that, so I can't really talk much about that. I don't know if maybe Adrian or who's here can say something about that more in detail.
Okay, thank you. There are also 3 points to David. Can you see the questions and answers? There is this one comment related that the difference between Parliament's 60% and EU Commission 55% is not increased flexibility, which are the allowances for sinks, but the ambitious level. Do you want to, David, comment on that?
I mean, thank you, Stefan. I mean, I think you know, I think there is a question as to how people, you know, maybe perceive the the value of including sinks. I think the point that you're making here, which is one, as I said, we didn't really get into in detail when we were thinking internally, but is kind of a question as kind of the issue of separating out kind of nature-based solutions, kind of afforestation and soils from the more technical type measures under carbon dioxide removal. So I think that's one of the other questions, which I think is in his part, in Stefan's part, C, that you know, creating a separate measure that's, for example, focused on geological storage would avoid this danger of kind of polluting or confusing matters by having these different approaches within a single box. Again, that is ultimately, I think, in the very near term for the Commission and Parliament to reconcile. I do think the point that he makes, I think, regarding you know, international carbon credits is an important one, because again, if you think of flexibility or particularly the danger of it's kind of watering down the strength of the commitment, you know, the potential for allowing in measures that are taken in other countries where, you know, from an accounting and other perspective, it's not as well grounded, not as well accounted for. That would be, you know, that would be so I take the point that you know, the Commission and Parliament's focus on excluding international carbon credits would serve that purpose. But you know, but as I was trying to get at, you know, our goal is not to try and resolve political disputes, but to say, you know, almost regardless of how this proceeds, we would hope that really quite a bit of scrutiny is given to thinking about how to take CDR forward in the longer term.
Thank you, David. I think there's another question directed to you because it's about UK. So the question is that how is the UK going to align or not with European commitments and policies?
I mean, what one I don't know, positive thing is of this Brexit non-stop 4 years is one thing that hasn't suffered is the UK's climate ambitions. So if anything, they have kind of redoubled their commitment to these issues. I mean, I think I think the issue is not so much commitments, which is the level of commitment will be high. I think the issue is with regard to policies. So only just in the energy white paper that came out in the last days was there a bit of clarity that the ambition would be to develop a UK emissions trading scheme. And these are kind of even internally getting the policies sorted. It has taken maybe longer than people had expected. I suppose the issue in the longer term is how that would align. I think there probably is a view of many that it would be good to at least allow for the potential future alignment between a UK TS and the European ETS. But clearly these issues are rather secondary in the discussions between Monsieur Barnier and Lord Frost at the moment.
Thank you, David. What is the exact situation with the 2030 targets? Because I saw some news about very ambitious, I don't know what kind of news they were, but they were even highlighting 70% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. But can you give some indication that what kind of news that was?
So the UK target is 68%, I believe. That's part of the, again, this was just last week or 2 weeks ago released. So again, that's what I mean in terms of the level of ambition. It's high, but in terms of the policies that would need to be enacted, it is still those need to be worked out. There was as I said, there's a 10-point plan that was released a month ago. Last week there was a more detailed energy white paper that was released. But whether it's the EU or the UK, they face the same challenges, which is you needing to sort out the details. And it is the details of how you would actually incentivize individual action in particular sectors that needs to be clarified, and that's still quite a lot of work to be done there.
Thank you. Harri Laurikka also raised a good question there that should NETPs be seen as a complementary tool to improve ambitions and to fight the overshoot rather than as a flexibility measure or a limited measure to offset some residual emissions? I'm not sure, Harri, would you like to say something loud? Or is it that ETA, you have muted everybody?
Yes, they are muted, but can raise the hand and I will unmute them in case.
Okay. So could you raise your hand if you are able to speak? Or if you are wanting to speak?
I mean, if I could just very quickly answer.
Okay, I've unmuted Laurikka.
Okay. But maybe if, David, you want to say something first.
Well, I mean, just very quickly. I mean, I think part of the challenge in thinking about overshoot is the idea is will we underperform? And that's a question. And the I think whatever the enhanced target that the EU ends up delivering in the next few weeks and days and weeks, the goal should be first to try and meet that target. So in some respects, the idea of overshoot is kind of a longer term concept. Is partly depends on how successful we are in meeting the targets that we are establishing for the next decade, which is again partly to the point that we were, I think, agreeing upon within the consortium, that it is kind of the longer term question of delivering CDR at scale that we should be focused on. For the near term, it is the kind of ambition, the near term ambitions that we should be trying to accomplish, to try and meet as aggressive as possible mitigation targets.
So thank you, David. So Harry, would you like to say something about your comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my point was just to raise this point of improving ambition. Quite often you see the NETPs presented as a way to kind of offset the residual emissions, and it's kind of a limited perspective to the possibilities that these technologies provide. So maybe the question was, should they rather be seen as an addition to the toolbox that we have in fighting climate change? Thanks.
Thank you. So we also have Mr. Hilber, who has raised your hand. Please, you have some.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. It's very early here in the Southern Hemisphere. I was thinking about, we always talk about targets and dates and targets, and I want to focus a bit about the speed in which we can achieve those targets, because there is an urgent need to act very rapidly now in order to decrease the surface of the curve below the CO2 emissions, no? And I wanted to discuss a bit what's your idea about the possibilities of the carbon negative technologies. There are some of them already on the field with a lot of experience and a lot of years already. And what's your opinion about how can we speed the decrease of the CO2 emissions and capture in very early, no, and not leaving to the end of the target. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. In fact, I also had some second question about the urgency of climate change mitigation. I guess that these comments were directly focused on the urgency, because when we were looking at the questionnaire, there were people who were had some suspicious about NETPs, and on the other hand, the second half was really like giving some ideas and concerns about the urgency as a whole. So I can see that there is also Debanov. I'm sorry, I'm not able to pronounce your name.
Yes,
But
can I speak?
Yes, yeah. Please go ahead.
You can just short it to Dev. So it's Devnath. I was going through this webinar, so I have a couple of comments basically. So for the fast deployment, what I feel is that we need a very good policy framework to push these NETPs, and as well as to limit the, stricter stricter levels for the reduction of the emissions. And one thing that I feel that it should be introduced all over the globe, that sustainability tax. Instead of going for carbon tax, if we do it in this way, like sustainability tax, I think it will be a bit more broader, and it will certainly help in achieving more number of goals, not only NETP's implementation. So I think those are my observations and my comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Kati or Lassi that are there still some questions on chat, or David, I guess you have something to comment or respond. I can see that you opened your video.
Well, no, I mean, what more with? I mean, I know Matthias has a comment, but I mean, with regard to the previous point about some sort of tax, I mean, I think, these are the sorts of things we will try to be exploring within the consortium. I mean, from a political economy perspective, taxes have long been found to be really problematic and difficult to implement. It's not an accident that we wound up with an ETS in the EU. So I would not be optimistic about any sort of tax approach necessarily to solving the issue.
Yeah, thank you, David. Like I mentioned, that our project is still in the beginning. So the slide which Kati showed in the beginning showed that what are really the different working packages about the contents of the whole project. So this, what Selene was presenting, that was about the first steps related to the technological side. We have several forthcoming analyses where we are going more in depth to the existing scenarios. Now I showed some literature which related more to the demand of the NETPs. But then the big question is also about the supply of NETPs. So what are really the risks, environmental risks, planetary boundaries, and so on. So this work is coordinated by PIC from Germany. So this will be an interesting topic to combine this more traditional integrated assessment scenario modeling with the analyses related to planetary boundaries, and then combine and really looking at the more realistic potentials. And then what David was saying also, what is really happening to the political side and the governance, that of course will be also interlinked to the analysis.
Tina, I think there is one interesting question in
the
chat.
Please, Kati.
So there is a question about the development, demonstration, and scale-up of the negative emission technologies. So what is the thinking of the panel as to appropriate immediate steps to avoid the valley of death between initial piloting and scaled operation? So maybe David or Tina, you have comments on that.
Maybe David, if you could start, and I don't know if Selene has also comments about these technologies. I could comment then after that.
Yeah, I just to say, I think that's kind of what we were getting at, which is there is a concern that if the focus is primarily in a very utilitarian way of thinking about CDR as just meeting targets, then we're not going to be focused on how to really get a number of these technologies ready over the next decade, or at least to test their readiness. Maybe there's a better way of saying it, because some of them might not turn out to be ready. But I do think that we are talking about the need for investments of at least many millions of euros to begin to push on this. It's not just enough to have paper studies, but you need to actually actively be funding demonstrators. For example, you need to have pots of some, if you want, tens of millions that would encourage the best of these to come forward. I think there's a need for, we're seeing n=1 or n=2, and we sort of can do modeling of what large N looks like, but it is kind of, how do you get to the scaled up third or fourth effort, which is non-negligible, and runs the potential for this kind of valley of death outcome that Matthias points to. So I do think it is, it is the sort of issue that we really do need to encourage governments to be thinking about quite seriously. It's not the sort of thing that will just happen. It's not the sort of thing that we can do through Horizon Europe type, smallish type budgets. It's some many millions that would be required to take and test some of these options to take them to the next level.
Yeah, thank you. Would you like to add something, Selen, about the valley of death?
Well, yes, I agree that the costs are the main factor that are hindering the larger scale deployment of these technologies. Maybe one possible, well, maybe not the solution, but one thing that could help would be the strategy that, for instance, Climeworks is following. Climeworks is a direct air capture plant, and they are selling the service of CO2 capture and storage. So you can offset the emissions that you produce when you're traveling by buying the service of CO2 storage. So that could help. I don't think that is the ultimate solution, but well, that could help to solve this problem, yes.
Yeah, maybe I could also add the story from Finland, because like I showed that we have recognized for a very, very long time that Finland has a really high potential for carbon dioxide removal, with especially with biomass related carbon capture and storage. Because we have a lot of forest-based biomass industries in Finland, forest industries, bioenergy, and so on. And when we are doing our scenario assessments, we can see that Finland could even be like a potential seller of carbon credits, if that kind of mechanism someday exists for negative emission removals. But then, of course, there have been some very long time also the industrial interests. So there have been some real plans, especially for the carbon capture and storage, but those were initially fossil-based, but more and more projects are also having some piloting and demonstration from direct air capture as an example, but these don't still have the component of storage. So it's more about producing chemicals and even food from with the help of direct air capture. So there are a lot of industrial interests which is now going around, and we can see that Finland has a lot of potential, but of course the markets are still not there. So we really need the market pull as well to make things really happen. Unfortunately, I can see that Timo Ritonomi has already left, but because he's coming from the energy department of the Ministry of Economy and Employment in Finland, maybe he might have also had some comments on that. But this is like a story from Finland, and hopefully these demonstration and piloting projects really will move on. So Kati and Lassi, can you, or David or somebody else, can you still see some extra comments? I can see that Constance from PIC, who is also now part of the NEGEM projects, she has these concerns about sustainability. So I think this is when we are talking about the risks, these are really these kind of issues which need to be raised. I don't know, Constance, if you would like to comment and also give some indication what you would be doing in your work in NEGEM. And if I don't know if from ETA you could also.
Yes, she's able to speak.
Okay.
I think
please speak louder. Okay, Constance.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentations and also for the good discussion and comments. As I wrote earlier in the comments, I'm working in working package 3, the impact assessment on in NEGEM, and we will work on supply-based scenarios that address what negative emissions can actually be provided if we maintain, or if we keep the pressures on the environment to a minimum, so to say. Yeah, the supply constrained by environmental limits. And I really like to hear, or not I like to hear, but there were some mentions about, yeah, sustainability concerns, also the comment from Deb. And I think when we talk about what is needed to address these environmental constraints and sustainability issues, we would need to also think about incentives for that. So as long as we only pay for negative emissions, but don't give incentives for maintaining the ecosystem stability, those huge technologies, the high-tech technologies with a lot of potential, will always win over those small-scale technologies that store carbon, maybe just a smaller fraction than other technologies, but they also provide those numerous co-benefits for the environment. If we look at biochar with the yield increases and the benefits for the soil and a lot of soil carbon sequestration measures that are just so good for the resilience of the ecosystems, which is another huge problem in the world, we should really align those efforts. Negative emissions on the one side because we need them so urgently, but also keeping the whole Earth system stable, because this is what we also need so urgently. We will try to address it from the biophysical, biogeochemical side in working package 3. But yeah, I'm a Earth system analysis, so I'm not working with incentives and economics. So this is maybe something else to address elsewhere. Thank you.
So thank you, Constance. I guess that David, you have something to comment.
I mean, just to follow on this, I mean, and it's also related, I think, to Matthias's follow-on comment to us, who again didn't use the Q&A but used the, use the chat. But yeah, and that is, you know, Constance said, well, it will be, you know, some of these aspects won't be taken into account. Well, I mean, that is, you know, that is actually a choice for governments going forward. You know, as I mentioned, you know, in many ways the UK is probably quite far along in terms of thinking about bringing what they call GGR, which we call CDR, into this, but they still don't have any business models laid out. They haven't really provided the clarity for developers, for those who want to take these kind of types of projects forward. So, you know, so I would only point out that, you know, there's still much to play for. There's still many kind of, you know, detailed, you know, gets down into the kind of the boring accounting details of what is or is not included, what is considered acceptable or not as a, you know, kind of a verifiable ton of emissions that we can account for. So, so I guess the point is, there are many kind of detailed debates and discussions that need to be had in terms of determining how this will actually kind of manifest itself. You know, what will actually materialize. You know, going forward, and that's not. I don't think that's not a done deal. It's not completely obvious as to how that will. You know, for example, take into account some of those sustainability considerations that Constance is talking about.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I can see that we are really having a interesting years coming to discuss further this. But there is also one question, I guess that this is directly now for Celent, that is about LCA standard. Can you say something about which LCA standard will be followed in your work?
Yes, we will use an attributional LCA. We're planning to use the recipe and the environmental footprint characterization methods to model our impacts. We think that we should select as the functional unit of our processes the capture, well, the storage of 1 net ton of CO2, because there's some, we must make a distinction between gross CO2 and net CO2 avoided and stored. Yeah, I don't know if you have a more specific question, but that is the general, those are the general guidelines that we are planning to follow.
So thank you, Selen. In fact, I think that we are moving already now to the end. At VTT, we have launched this new ways of working. So instead of having 15 minutes overtime, we are trying to focus that we are finalizing 15 minutes beforehand. So I will follow our new rules now and give you a present to relax for 15 minutes, maybe before your next meetings or activities. So I will give you some final words about the next steps, what is happening. So now I'm talking about what is happening after the vision workshop and the vision. So we will use these question balls and also what we have had the discussions around here, the literature review and so on. This will be a background material to the first deliverable of this working package, where the vision formulation is included. But if you have any comments or feedback, please, you are welcome also to send an email or comment some otherwise. There was this contact person. My email was there in the invitation. You can see it there. The work will be summarized, as I said, in the first deliverable that is due in January 2021. And it will take some time before the practicalities have been went through. So I guess that it will take some months after end of January before we are able to put it to the public websites. But anyway, the report will be publicly available next winter, including the literature and vision analysis, what we are now have been talking about. And then the vision work will continue throughout the NEGEM project. So this was just a kickoff, having some first ideas, first comments, first suggestions, and so on, and first feelings about the vision, what is the role of NETPs if we are targeting the goals of Paris Agreement. There will be still a second vision workshop that will be organized by the end of year 2023. So that is in that stage when we are having the NEGEM analysis on realistic potentials. So then we were having more presentations on the results. And then, of course, based on the results, the initial vision and the work we have been carried out throughout the project, we will update the vision and the finalize before the end of the project. So I will thank you, everybody who has been joining us today. And I will also wish you very relaxing and nice season holidays. I guess many of you are already starting that tomorrow, and the rest of you maybe a little bit later. So thank you, everybody. Have a good time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you from my behalf as well,
Thank
and
you.
hope to see you in the NEGEM events later on as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you from ETA Florence as well. Bye.